Subscribe now and turn on the bell so you never miss a story. Let's get started. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching my mother place the silverware with familiar precision, one hand on her hip, the other gripping a folded napkin. The table glowed with the golden light of early evening, the scent of baked ham and rosemary bread wafting through the air. But my place, top left corner, always next to the window, was conspicuously empty. Did you forget one? I asked, already knowing the answer. Mom didn't flinch. She adjusted a spoon and smoothed the corner of a placemat like she hadn't heard me. Dad, sitting on the couch with the TV remote balanced on his knee, kept his eyes on the screen, the volume too low to be an excuse. Rachel, of course, was in the center of the room like she always was, laughing too loud, retelling some half-true story about a friend's bachelorette party in a way that made her the hero and the victim all at once. I can grab another plate, I offered, stepping toward the cupboard. No need, Mom said quickly, her voice gentle but flat. There are only 5 of us tonight. Only 5. That was the moment something cold slid behind my ribs and stayed there. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something slower, like a faucet dripping in a quiet house, persistent and inescapable. I looked at Rachel. Her gaze didn't even flick toward me. She was opening a bottle of wine, the same one she used to swipe from my cabinet when I wasn't home, back when I thought sharing was part of loving family. Back when I still believed love looked like showing up at 2 a.m. with jumper cables or Venmoing someone gas money you'd never see again. I remember when love looked like letting her crash on my couch after every new disaster. When it looked like silence. Compromise. Excuses. But tonight, love looked like exclusion. Intentional. Surgical. I stood for another second, then sat on the armrest instead of at the table, like some forgotten neighbor who stopped by at the wrong time. No one told me to leave. No one looked surprised. That was the worst part. Not the forgetting, but the acceptance. The quiet decision that my seat was no longer required. It wasn't always this way. I used to be the fixer. The backup plan. The emotional punching bag with a plastered-on smile. If Rachel needed bailing out, I did it. If she needed a ride, money, excuses, I gave them. And if she caused chaos, I cleaned it. Mom used to call me her steady rock. Dad used to say I was the responsible one. Rachel used to send emojis with heart eyes when I paid her rent or fixed her car. Not thank you, just gifts. Emojis. Like I was some ATM that replied in emojis. And I did it all quietly. Because that's what you do for family. Right. Except, eventually, the quiet turns into resentment. Then the resentment starts to calcify. And then one day, they set 5 plates. Not 6. The memory that bubbled up wasn't some grand betrayal or yelling match. No, it was smaller. Simpler. Rachel was 8. I was 14. She dumped bubble bath into the fish tank because they looked hot. When the goldfish floated, Dad didn't ask her why. He asked me why I wasn't watching her. I said I had algebra homework. I got grounded for a week. She lost dessert. That was the blueprint. Punishment never fit the crime when Rachel committed it. But the consequences? They always landed on me. Alex, Mom said now, finally looking up. Why don't you take a walk? We just want a peaceful dinner tonight. Peaceful. That word slammed into my chest harder than I expected. Because I knew what it meant. It meant Rachel didn't want to deal with me after what I'd done. It meant she'd turned the story upside down again, painted herself the wounded one. After everything, after the truck, the crash, the report, the fallout, she still had the power to twist the narrative until I became the villain for refusing to keep quiet. I stood up. My knee cracked, and the sound was louder than anyone's voice had been since I arrived. I walked past the table, past the warm food and the fake centerpieces and the bottle of wine. I opened the front door and stepped out without a word. No one followed. I walked to the sidewalk and kept walking. Past the neighbors' houses with their tidy lawns and glowing porch lights. Past the mailbox still stuffed with flyers. I walked until the ache in my legs matched the ache behind my eyes. That night I didn't drive home. I parked near the lake, turned off the engine, and just sat there. Watching the water reflect a sky full of stars that didn't care who got blamed, who got invited, who got erased. 5 plates. Not 6. That's how I knew I didn't belong anymore, not just in the house, but in the story my family told themselves. And the worst part? I hadn't changed. I hadn't lashed out or screamed. I hadn't stolen or lied. I had simply stopped fixing things. I had said no. One single no, after a lifetime of yes. And that was enough to unseat me from the table. The realization didn't crush me. Not like I thought it would. It was more like an exhale you didn't realize you were holding. A hollow space clearing in your chest, just wide enough for something new to begin. Maybe peace isn't something you're handed. Maybe it's something you claim, one empty plate at a time. Rachel was always the one who laughed loudest. She laughed through overdue bills, through missed deadlines, through broken hearts that she left in her wake. And our parents, God, our parents, they laughed too, in that indulgent, weary way parents do when they think youth is just a phase that excuses all behavior. I let them laugh. Because I had already learned that silence would soon speak louder. It started small, like most patterns of destruction do. Rachel would ask for a little, just a little. Gas money. Textbook money. Rent money. And I'd give it. Because I was the older brother. Because she's trying. Because it's only temporary. But temporary became habitual, and habitual turned into entitled. There were no thank yous. No plans to repay. Only red heart emojis and sarcastic texts. I joke about setting up a spreadsheet to track it all, but the truth is, I already had one. Quietly. Religiously. The irony is that while Rachel always had chaos swirling around her, I was the one people expected to clean up the storm. Like I was born with a mop and bucket in my hands. I kept doing it because it felt easier than saying no. Until the night she took the truck. That week had been brutal. The Texas heat had turned the rooftops into frying pans, and I'd spent every hour sweating through metal scaffolding, installing air conditioning units while the sun beat down like it was punishing me for something I didn't do. So when Rachel's name popped up on my phone at 3:04 a.m., I should have known. Borrowed the Tacoma for a quick spin, big bro. She drives like butter. Don't be mad. Attached was a selfie, Rachel, in my driver's seat, makeup flawless, fingers glittering on the steering wheel. My stomach dropped through the floor. I called her, my hands shaking, a dozen worst-case scenarios already writing headlines in my mind. She picked up on the fifth ring, laughing over some throbbing bass line. You stole my truck, Ratch. It's not stealing, it's borrowing. We're family. Also, you weren't using it. I wanted to yell, but the energy drained out of me too fast to catch fire. It's my name on the title. My loan. My insurance. Semantics, she said and then added. Gotta go. They're playing my song. And just like that, she hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch, phone plugged in like it was hooked to a defibrillator. I thought about all the times I'd shown up for her. About the job interview I missed because I had to pick her up from a party where she left her keys in a stranger's car. About the birthday where I paid for her whole weekend getaway because money was tight. About the relationships I'd ruined, Alyssa, most notably, because there was never space in my life for anyone else when Rachel was drowning and calling my name. The call came at 2:11 a.m. Her voice was cracked, panicked. I'm okay, don't freak out. But I hit Dos Gatos Cantina. I tried to decode it. My brain fought the fog of sleep and stress. Then I realized she had crashed my truck into a downtown bar. Because she saw her ex. Because jealousy burned faster than sense. If you say I loaned you the truck, it's just property damage, she added quickly. No crime. Help me, please. I didn't speak. For once, I let the silence stretch. For once, I didn't rescue her. And then she snapped. You can be such a selfish bastard. That was the moment something broke. Not like a glass shattering, but like a rope giving way after years of strain. I whispered, Goodbye, Rachel. And I ended the call. What followed was a family cyclone. Mom called, crying. Your sister could have died. Dad texted, Fix this. We raised you better. Even Aunt Doris from Florida sent a group message. Families weather storms together. Don't be the lightning. But I was done. At lunch that day, my dad showed up at my apartment. Knocked like he was the police. He wasn't alone. Mom stood behind him, clutching a casserole dish like a peace offering or a weapon. I wasn't sure which. Get your shoes, Dad said. We're going to pay Rachel's ER bill. She crashed my truck, I said, after stealing it. Mom's eyes welled up. She acted out because you abandoned her. She needed you. I stared at her, incredulous. She needed $500 for bottle service. That's not a need. And then, out of nowhere, Dad slapped me. Open palm. Right across the face. This thing came fast, but the betrayal burned longer. You are no longer our son, he said. Behind him, Mom gasped but didn't reach for me. Her hands tightened around her purse strap instead. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for understanding. I just said, Then I'm done fixing what you ignore. And I closed the door. That silence, that slam of finality, echoed longer than anything I'd ever shouted. 3 days later, I opened my apartment door to find 2 uniformed officers. Rachel had filed a stolen vehicle claim against me. Said the truck was hers. Said I threatened her for $5,000 in hush money. I didn't flinch. I slid my phone across the table at the station, showed them her texts, her selfies, her borrowed hashtags. Do you want to press charges? Detective Alvarez asked. Yes, I said. Grand theft auto. Filing a false report. And there it was. The sound of silence turning into something louder than screams, a legal record. An inked decision. A statement that finally said no more. The fallout was nuclear. Rachel lost her job. Her friends stopped answering. She couch-surfed. Her GoFundMe campaign for rebuilding after injustice got $38, all from Mom's bridge club. Mom and Dad came back again, eyes red, hands empty. Let her stay, Mom begged. Just until she gets back on her feet. There's a shelter on 5th, I said. Dad's voice cracked. Son, you said I wasn't your son, I replied, and closed the door again, this time gentler. Not out of anger, but because the fire had burned out. Only ash remained. They laughed once, Rachel and my parents, like I was the one who couldn't take a joke. But now they didn't laugh. They pleaded. They whispered. They begged. And I let them. I let them spin their stories. Let them throw their tantrums. Let them cry. Because my silence, calm, firm, unshaken, was louder than all of it. The courthouse smelled like anxiety masked with lemon cleaner. The air was too still, like it was holding its breath. I sat beside my lawyer, Ms. Hawkins, sharp bob, sharper instincts, and tried to appear calm. Outside, the sun blazed like it didn't care about family implosions or criminal charges or how hard it was to breathe when your last thread of loyalty had finally snapped. Across the aisle, Rachel shuffled into view wearing county orange, her wrists in cuffs, mascara streaking down her cheeks in desperate rivulets. She didn't look at me. Not yet. Her eyes scanned the courtroom like she still expected this to be a prank. Like I'd stand up and say, "Just kidding," the way I used to whenever she cried over scraped knees or broken curfews. But I didn't move. The judge read out the charges, grand theft auto, filing a false report, and Rachel's lawyer tried to soften the blow with words like familial misunderstanding and emotional distress. But facts don't bend to sentiment. The text, the photos, the voicemail, all signed and timestamped like a paper trail of too many second chances. The prosecutor stood and calmly shredded the misunderstanding narrative like tissue. By the time they finished, there was nothing left but silence. And then the judge, not unkindly, set bail high. Too high. I didn't flinch. Rachel did. Just once. A blink. But I saw it. That was the beginning of the unraveling. After court, I didn't go home right away. I stopped by a diner with greasy counters and bad coffee, the kind of place where people don't ask questions when you stare too long at your reflection in the sugar dispenser. Ms. Hawkins slid into the booth across from me. She blinked. She said like she'd read my mind. "You signed that check with your silence." And she didn't expect it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, my life wasn't a reaction to Rachel's chaos. It was a decision. My decision. That night, the voicemails started. Mom sobbing. "Jesus forgave thieves. You should forgive liars." Dad hissing like a coiled snake. "Withdraw that report or you'll regret it." Rachel, 5 messages in a row, the first an explosion, the second denial, the third tears, the fourth slurred apologies, the fifth a quiet "Please." I didn't respond. Silence, it turns out, is like a mirror. People hate it because they're forced to see themselves in it. And my family had spent years avoiding reflections. The fallout was swift. Rachel was suspended from work, then fired after the mugshot hit local news. The friends she once bragged about vanished like they'd never existed. The landlord changed her locks. Her world, built on unearned indulgence, collapsed in slow motion. Mom showed up 3 days later with a casserole dish and a soft voice. "She's still your sister. There's a shelter on 5th Street. I replied, not unkindly. Dad tried the next day. He didn't bring food. Just a look I'd only ever seen once before, the night he struck me. "She's lost everything," he said. "She lost it herself." I said. "You used to protect her. I used to enable her." He didn't argue. Just stared, like he couldn't decide whether to hate me or admire me. Then he left. No slammed door. Just that thick silence again. The prosecutor reached out a week later with an offer. Drop the felony in exchange for restitution. "Restitution from what?" I asked. "She has $12 and a box of expired mascara." Offer withdrawn. Ms. Hawkins leaned over and said, "You don't owe them a clean ending. You owe yourself closure." Still, it was hard. Some nights I'd unlock my phone and stare at her name, hovering over the withdraw complaint button. Then I'd remember the slap, the truck, the lie, and I'd set it face down again, like a live grenade I refused to cradle. My job became my refuge. Miguel, my foreman, saw the bruise still healing on my face and assumed it was from a bar fight. I didn't correct him. He told me how his cousin stole his car once, and he pressed charges. Cousin spent 6 weekends in jail. Now we barbecue together every 4th of July. He said. Consequences fertilize growth. Maybe they do. Or maybe they just burn everything to the ground so something else can finally grow. I started therapy through the company's assistance program. Dr. Patel wore socks with planets on them and said things like, "Guilt is rent you pay in someone else's apartment." I liked her. She didn't pity me. She didn't judge the cold edges forming in my voice. She just helped me learn how to breathe again. Not long after, Rachel pled out. Probation. Mandatory counseling. A repayment schedule that would take 15 years at minimum wage. When the official notice came, I didn't feel triumphant. Just lighter. Like some cosmic scale had finally tipped, and I was no longer buried under it. That same week, I received a letter from my parents' attorney. The family trust had been dissolved. Assets would now be divided among those deemed supportive. A sticky note in Mom's handwriting was attached. "We still pray you'll come to your senses." I held it in my hand for a long time. Then I burned it in the sink and watched the ink curl like a lie folding into smoke. They thought it would hurt. That disinheritance would sting. But what they never realized is I'd spent my whole life being poor in love. Money couldn't fix that. After that I moved. Colorado air was thinner, crisper, more honest. I found a small apartment above a bakery. The scent of cinnamon and rising dough replaced the suffocating weight of obligation. I adopted a dog from a shelter, Radar, a shaggy mutt with trust issues and a crooked tail. The volunteer said he'd been abandoned after chewing through a couch. Misunderstood. She called him. I laughed. Misunderstood felt like a family trait I could live with. I wrote one letter home. Just one. I love you both. I will not discuss Rachel until she completes counseling, reimburses damages, and apologizes without excuses. My door remains closed until then. Alex. There was no reply. But weeks later, my cousin Lyle emailed. Uncle Mark says you're lost, agreed. Then added, "For what it's worth, I think you finally stood up straight." It was the first message in years that made me smile. Mara came into my life like sunlight under a door crack. She volunteered at Habitat for Humanity and had a laugh like wind chimes. We talked over nails and lumber, coffee and quiet hikes. I told her the short version of everything, family drama, courtrooms, fallout. She didn't flinch. "Healthy boundaries are sexy," she said, grinning. I wasn't used to that. Praise without conditions. It felt dangerous. Then it felt right. Rachel sent one final message that year. "This is Rachel. I completed 90 days sober. Counselor says I should make amends. I understand if you block me. Just wanted to say I'm sorry. No guilt. No ask. Just words." I didn't reply. Not out of hatred. Not even anger. Because forgiveness, as Dr. Patel once said, is a gift you wrap for yourself. I'm just not ready to open it yet. On New Year's Eve, Mara and I stood on Lookout Mountain. Fireworks exploded below like tiny galaxies. Radar barked at the colors. Comet, our new 3-legged rescue dog, tried to chase the reflections in the snow. I whispered, "Here's to peace, even when chaos knows your address." Mara leaned her head on my shoulder. "Here's to not answering when it knocks." That night, as we turned in, I passed the framed truck title on the wall. The one I'd finally paid off. The one she wrecked. The one I rebuilt. Underneath it sat the broken Tacoma emblem, twisted and scorched from the crash. I kept it as a reminder, not of destruction, but of survival. Visitors sometimes ask, "Why not throw it away?" I tell them, "Because it reminds me which crashes are worth driving away from." And when I say that, I always imagine Rachel, sitting in that courtroom, watching me calmly sign the complaint papers, the bail forms, the final check. She blinked. Because for the first time in our lives, I was the one driving. Winter in Colorado came with a quietness I hadn't known I needed. It blanketed the world in a hush, the kind of hush that didn't demand anything of you, no reaction, no rescue, no apology. Just space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to become someone who wasn't always waiting for the next emergency to blow through like a Texas dust storm. In that silence, I began to build a life not defined by the fires I put out, but by the warmth I let in. Radar curled by the fireplace every night, dreaming his dog dreams. Mara filled our kitchen with cinnamon and jazz on Saturday mornings. Our second dog, Comet, clumsy, excitable, determined, learned how to sprint with 3 legs like he never had 4 to begin with. Some nights I'd lie awake, the Colorado wind brushing against the window panes like a whisper. And I'd wonder if Rachel ever really understood what she had set in motion. Not just the crash. Not the court. But the quiet unraveling of a story we had all told ourselves, that I would always be there, that my forgiveness had no bottom, that I would carry what no one else wanted to hold. She broke that narrative with her silence. Not the drunken, screaming voicemails from those first weeks. Not the fake apologies sung to the tune of Disney shows. Not even the 3 a.m. text that said, "I'm sober now, I swear." All of those were noise. But later, after the court dates faded, after my name was officially removed from the will, and after her last attempt at manipulation landed flat, she stopped. She stopped calling. Stopped messaging. Stopped begging. At first, the absence felt like a dare. Like a coiled spring ready to snap. I waited for the next wave of guilt, for the next guilt-laced casserole from Mom or a message from Dad demanding one last olive branch. But it didn't come. And that's when I realized she was really gone. Not physically. Not from the planet. But from the narrative. The one where I was always cast as the fixer, the emotional insurance policy, the guarantee. That character died in a courtroom. And nobody came to the funeral. I didn't need her apology. Her silence said everything. When someone who has always taken finally stops reaching for you, you learn 2 things at once: how much of yourself you gave away, and how much you still have left. The court-mandated restitution payments started arriving, tiny checks and tearaway envelopes with handwriting I didn't recognize. Not Rachel's. The state's. She never wrote a note. Never added a sorry. And I never wanted her to. Because if she ever did apologize, not to escape consequences, not to win sympathy, but truly, honestly, it would come in the form of accountability. And even then, I wasn't sure if I needed it. Healing had already begun without her permission. Without her participation. Mara asked me once, when we were lying under a flannel blanket watching snow fall through the window, "Would you ever want her back in your life?" I didn't answer immediately. I counted the breaths between us. The stillness. The dogs breathing softly at our feet. "I think I need her to be someone else," I said finally. "Someone who doesn't build bonfires just to feel warm." Mara nodded like she understood something unspoken. "Then she'd have to want that too. And most people don't want to be someone else. They want the world to change around them." It was a hard truth. But I'd lived it. I spent my whole life adjusting myself, bending to accommodate Rachel, to cushion her falls, to erase her mistakes before they echoed. My childhood was a long list of substitutions. No sleepovers because Rachel needed a ride. No summer jobs because Rachel needed supervision. No savings because Rachel needed one more dress, one more refund, one more chance. But in Colorado, no one asked me to bend. In fact, most people didn't even know my story. They knew me as Alex, the guy who helped build houses on weekends. The one who baked banana bread with too much cinnamon and wore the same flannel 3 days in a row. Not Rachel's brother. Not the guy who walked out of a family inheritance. Just Alex. And that was enough. One night, we hosted a small dinner. Mara cooked. I grilled. Friends from Habitat came, bringing mismatched chairs and bottles of wine with handwritten labels. It was nothing like the elaborate family dinners of my past. No 5-course tension, no guilt marinated in gravy, no side orders of resentment. Someone asked me what brought me to Colorado. I said, a change in altitude. And attitude. They laughed. And I did too. Not because I was covering anything, but because it was true. Later, after the guests had gone and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I found a message on my phone. Unknown number. "This is Rachel. I'm 5 months sober now. I'm working at a diner. Still on probation. Counselor says I should try again. I know I hurt you. I'm sorry." There was no reply button needed. No guilt trip. No demand. Just words. I stared at it a long time. Then slid the phone away. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't feel a single urge to call back. Because I didn't need her apology. Her silence had already told me what I needed to know, that she finally understood words weren't currency anymore. That my forgiveness wasn't something she could buy with performance. I mentioned the message to Dr. Patel during our next session. She smiled and said, "You know what that is? That's weight being lifted. Whether or not you choose to pick it back up is your choice." "Do people really change?" I asked. She paused. "Some do. When it costs them something. When they lose more than they ever expected to. And sometimes, even then, it's not enough. But your peace doesn't depend on their evolution. It was the best advice I'd ever received. Mara and I went to the mountains that weekend. Took the dogs. Built a fire. Read books. Didn't speak for hours, and it felt like conversation. It felt like home. Somewhere along the trail back down, I found a broken tree branch bent under the weight of snow. It hadn't snapped. Just bowed. Like it had survived something heavy and kept holding on. I thought about Rachel. About how some people bend so far they take others down with them. And how others, when they stop being leaned on, finally grow toward the light. I didn't know what her future held. Maybe she'd rebuild. Maybe she'd relapse. Maybe she'd disappear into a cycle of almost betters and never quites. But it wasn't my weight anymore. That spring, I framed the final restitution check. Not for pride. But as a reminder that closure doesn't always come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from release. On my birthday, a card arrived. No name. No return address. Just 2 words scribbled on the inside. Still trying. Mara opened it, read it, handed it to me. I tucked it into a drawer. Letting go doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means knowing it no longer defines you. Months passed. We got a second couch. Started talking about buying land. Not because we needed space, but because we finally had it, inside ourselves. And Rachel? Her silence stretched on. Not painful. Not cruel. Just honest. She no longer tried to claw her way back with manipulation or guilt. No more GoFundMe links. No more midnight rants. No more blaming me for her fall. Just space. And maybe that was the real apology. No expectations. No rehearsed grief. Just distance. The kind that says, I finally see what I did to you. I won't ask you to forget it. I'll just stop doing more of it. Forgiveness is often painted as a door we open for others. But I've learned it's more like a window we crack for ourselves, just enough to let fresh air in. I haven't opened the door yet. Maybe I never will. But that window? It's wide open now. And the view is breathtaking. When I look back on everything, the courtroom silence, the broken truck, the voicemail apologies, the Thanksgiving with one less plate, I realize the story wasn't just about Rachel. It was never just about my sister. It was about me. About the stories we're told as children and how long we keep believing them, even when they hurt us. About how loyalty, when abused, becomes a leash. About how love without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. This story, at its core, was about one man learning to step out of the roles that were assigned to him and finally choosing who he wanted to be. The life lesson? Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is walk away. That might sound harsh. We're raised to believe family is everything. That blood is thicker than water. That forgiveness should be infinite. That turning your back is cowardice. But none of those sayings ever come with instructions for what to do when love becomes lopsided. When one person gives and the other takes, endlessly. When family becomes a weapon to silence your needs and amplify someone else's wants. I learned that being the good son, or the responsible sibling, means nothing if it comes at the cost of your own dignity. For years I thought my value was tied to how useful I could be to other people. How quietly I could carry weight that wasn't mine. How quickly I could clean up messes I didn't make. But the truth is, responsibility without reciprocity is exploitation. Rachel didn't ruin my life. She simply held a mirror to it. She showed me how long I'd been trained to set myself on fire to keep others warm. How easily I'd accepted the role of caretaker, peacekeeper, the one who always picks up the phone, no matter the hour or the ask. And she wasn't the only one. My parents reinforced it, through guilt, through silence, through that one slap that spoke louder than any words ever could. But in that moment, when I closed the door after being disowned, when I refused to drop the charges, when I packed my bags for Colorado, not out of rage, but out of resolve, I did something I had never done before. I chose me. And that was the beginning of everything. Choosing yourself isn't easy. It's not glamorous. It doesn't come with applause. In fact, it comes with whispers, with judgment, with people unfriending you in real life and online. It comes with empty chairs at the holidays and voicemail inboxes full of blame. It comes with silence that feels like a test. Will you cave? Will you crawl back? Will you say sorry just to keep the peace? But the longer you sit with that silence, the more it changes. At first, it's sharp. Like rejection. Then, it softens. Becomes space. Space to think. To breathe. To realize that peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the absence of constant compromise. I learned that boundaries are not walls. They're doors with locks that you control. They don't shut people out. They keep chaos from setting up camp in your living room. They say, I love you, but I love me too. And sometimes they say, I love you, but I can't do this with you anymore. And that's okay. You're allowed to protect your peace. You're allowed to redefine family. You're allowed to build a new home, brick by brick, even if the foundation you grew up on was cracked. One of the most surprising things I discovered along the way is how healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes, it looks like a one-way letter that goes unanswered. Sometimes, it looks like a truck title finally paid off. Sometimes, it's a dog sleeping at your feet. A cup of coffee brewed without urgency. A Saturday with no crisis. A name on a lease that belongs only to you. Forgiveness is a personal process, not a public performance. It's not about erasing what happened. It's not about pretending it didn't matter. It's about refusing to let the pain define you anymore. It's about putting down the weight, not because the weight is gone, but because you're done carrying it. I forgave Rachel, in my own way. Not because she asked. Not because she deserved it. But because I didn't want to keep dragging that chapter behind me like a rusted anchor. I forgave her the moment I stopped needing her to be sorry. When her silence said what words never could, that she finally knew I wouldn't come running anymore. And I forgave my parents too. Not by inviting them back in, but by releasing the version of them I kept hoping they'd become. The parents who would stand up for me. See me. Choose me. I stopped waiting for them to change and started changing what I allowed to affect me. There's a kind of grief that comes with letting go of the people you thought were permanent. It's quiet. It sneaks in when you hear a song from childhood or smell a familiar recipe or pass a street you used to walk down together. But it's a clean grief. A necessary one. Because it creates room for something new to grow. In Colorado, I planted different roots. Mara. Radar. Comet. Our mismatched furniture. Our dinners with no drama. Our holidays with laughter that wasn't performative. Friends who knew me as Alex, not Rachel's brother. A therapist who reminded me that boundaries are an act of self-respect. A job where my worth wasn't tied to how much I sacrificed. And peace. So much peace. Peace in saying no. Peace in missing the call. Peace in not explaining yourself to people who already decided you were the villain. Peace in knowing you no longer need to prove your pain to anyone. That's the lesson I take with me, every day. That self-worth is not selfish. That walking away isn't failure, it's freedom. That sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply stop. Stop trying to fix what someone else keeps breaking. Stop showing up to fights where you're the only one unarmed. Stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. And start living. Start building a life where you are allowed to take up space. To have needs. To say no without guilt. To rest. To be seen. To be loved in ways that don't drain you. I used to think love meant never giving up. Now I know better. Love means choosing someone every day. But it also means choosing yourself when no one else will. So if you're reading this and you've been the fixer, the forgiver, the one who's always so strong, I want you to know, it's okay to stop. To breathe. To take inventory of what you've been holding. And to ask gently, does this belong to me? If it doesn't, you can set it down. That's not abandonment. That's not cruelty. That's healing. Because the truth is, not every family is a home. Not every relationship is worth restoring. And not every apology needs to be spoken aloud to be understood. Sometimes, silence really does say everything. And when it does, you'll know it's time to begin again. Not as a rescuer. Not as a martyr. Not as the person you had to be to survive. But as who you were always meant to become, whole, unburdened, and free.